My name was Mara Quinn, and I was 27 years old when I died on the warehouse floor. Technically, I was dead for 3 minutes before the paramedics brought me back. I remembered the moment clearly, the crushing pain in my chest, the concrete rushing up to meet my face, the distant sound of someone screaming my name. Then nothing. Just darkness and silence until the ambulance shocked my heart back into rhythm. When I opened my eyes in the emergency room, a nurse was calling my emergency contacts. My parents were listed first. I heard her leaving a message, her voice urgent and professional, explaining that their daughter had collapsed at work and was in critical condition at St. Michael's Hospital. Then she called them again. And again. No answer. As I lay there under harsh fluorescent lights, hooked to machines that beeped steadily, my phone sat on the bedside table. Hours passed. My parents never called back. They never came. Instead, around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification. My sister Lacey had posted on Instagram. The photo showed her at a trendy brunch spot downtown, mimosa in hand, sunlight streaming through the windows. The caption read, "Self-Care Sunday." Champagne glasses sparkles. I stared at that post while I was still in the ICU, and something inside me broke that had nothing to do with my failing heart. The nurses kept checking on me, their faces showing concern that had nothing to do with my medical condition. They'd noticed, I think, that no family had arrived. No one sat beside my bed holding my hand. No one paced the waiting room demanding updates. I was alone except for the machines keeping me alive and the medical staff doing their jobs. My body was shaking, not just from the physical trauma of nearly dying, but from the brutal truth settling over me like a heavy blanket. No one cared. Not really. My parents, who I'd called every week without fail, who I'd supported financially for the past 3 years, who I'd rearranged my entire life to help. They hadn't even bothered to listen to their voicemails. And Lacey, my younger sister by 2 years, was enjoying brunch while I'd been lying on a warehouse floor with my heart stopped. I realized then, staring at the sterile hospital ceiling, that family doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes it just means biology, nothing more. The word family didn't automatically come with love or care or even basic decency. Sometimes family was just people who shared your DNA and expected everything while giving nothing back. That truth hurt worse than the pain radiating through my chest. Lacey finally texted me around 3 in the afternoon. Not a phone call, not a visit, just a text message that appeared on my screen while I watched the 4 drip steadily into my arm. "You scared Mom," she'd written. "Don't do that again." That was it. No, are you okay? No, what happened? No, I'm coming to see you. Just blame, wrapped up in casual dismissiveness, as if my near-death experience had been some kind of deliberate inconvenience I'd inflicted on our mother. My chest burned, and for a moment I couldn't tell if it was physical pain or something deeper. I was still hooked to monitors, still weak enough that sitting up made me dizzy, and my sister was scolding me via text for scaring Mom. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then my coworker Ava appeared in the doorway, her face pale with worry. She'd been the one who'd found me collapsed, who'd called the ambulance, who'd ridden with me to the hospital. Now she squeezed my hand gently and said the words I needed to hear. "You deserve better, Mara. So much better than this." I started crying then, and Ava just held my hand while I finally let myself feel the full weight of being abandoned. When the hospital discharged me 3 days later, no one came to pick me up. I'd texted my parents the discharge time, hoping maybe they'd show up, that maybe they'd have some explanation for their absence. Nothing. Lacey read my message but didn't respond. So I sat in the hospital lobby in borrowed sweatpants, my belongings in a plastic bag, waiting for Ava to finish her shift at the warehouse so she could drive me home. She arrived with a blanket from her car, a bag of groceries, and a determination in her eyes that made me want to cry again. "You're staying with me tonight," she said firmly. No arguments. She drove me to her apartment, settled me on her couch, and made soup while I stared at nothing. Later, after I'd eaten and the medication had made me drowsy, Ava sat beside me and said something that would change everything. "Let's start something new, Mara. Something that's yours. Something that values you the way they never did." I didn't understand what she meant yet, but I held onto those words like a lifeline. Something new. Something mine. Something that mattered. For the first time in days, I felt something other than pain and betrayal. I felt possibility. When I finally went back to my own apartment the next day, I found 3 voicemails from my parents waiting on my phone. I listened to them with my hand pressed against my still healing chest, each word hitting like a physical blow. The first message was from my mother, her voice annoyed rather than concerned. Mara, the hospital keeps calling about some emergency. What's going on? You need to call us back. The second was from my father, equally irritated. Your mother's upset because the hospital called her at work. Is this really necessary? And the third, left the day after my collapse, was the one that made my blood run cold. We thought you were exaggerating again, Mara. You've always been so dramatic about everything. Call us when you've calmed down. Dramatic. Exaggerating. Those were the words they'd used to describe me nearly dying. I'd been working double shifts at the warehouse for months to send them money every paycheck, covering their mortgage when my father lost his job, paying for my mother's car repairs, funding their lifestyle while I lived in a studio apartment and ate ramen. And they thought I was being dramatic. I saved those voicemails. Something told me I'd need them later. I'd been the invisible child for as long as I could remember. Lacey had always been the golden one, stylish, loud, charming, adored by everyone who met her. She had our parents' artistic temperament, their flair for drama, their ability to command attention just by walking into a room. I was different. Quiet, steady, responsible. The one who fixed things when they broke, who solved problems without complaint, who kept the family running smoothly while everyone else chased their passions. When Lacey decided to go to art school, I'd been working at a grocery store to help pay for it. When she quit halfway through her sophomore year because she'd found the classes uninspiring, I'd been the one who'd taken over her student loan payments. $15,000 I'd paid off over 3 years, working overtime and skipping meals, because Lacey needed support to find her path. She'd never thanked me. Not once. She'd just moved on to the next thing, expecting the safety net I provided to always be there. And my parents had encouraged it, praised her creativity while telling me I was being practical and responsible. Which wasn't a compliment, I realized now. It was just another way of saying I didn't matter as much. 2 weeks after my collapse, after I'd returned to light-duty work at the warehouse, Lacey called me for the first time. Not to check on my recovery or apologize for her absence, just her usual casual call, as if nothing had happened. Hey Ma, she said brightly. Dad mentioned you're back at work already? That's good. But don't overdo it, okay? You know how you get. How I get. As if my near-death experience had been some personality flaw. I bit my tongue and waited for what I knew was coming. It always came. So, random question, Lacey continued, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I'd learned to recognize. My rent's due this week and I'm a little short. Could you spot me a few hundred? Just until my freelance payment comes through. She'd been saying just until for 5 years. The freelance payment never came through. The graphic design career never took off. But the requests for money never stopped. This time, I felt something different than my usual tired resignation. I felt anger, hot and clean and clarifying. I almost died, Lacey, I said quietly. She laughed, light and dismissive. Oh, come on, Mara. You're fine. You've always been strong. You're like, indestructible. I hung up without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed scrolling through social media, and there it was, another post from my family. A photo of my parents and Lacey at a nice restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and expensive wine. They were smiling, raising glasses to the camera, looking like the picture-perfect happy family. The caption, written by my mother, read, Family first red heart # blessed # family time. Family first. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Where had family first been when I was dying on a warehouse floor? Where had it been when I was alone in a hospital bed, scared and in pain? Where was it now, when I was still recovering, still weak, still processing the trauma of my heart stopping? Family first meant nothing. It was just something pretty to post on Instagram while excluding the family member who actually needed support. I took a screenshot of the post, though I didn't know why yet. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked all 3 of them on every social media platform. Let them wonder why I'd disappeared. Let them experience a fraction of the abandonment they'd shown me. It felt like freedom. The next morning, Ava found me in the break room before our shift started. She'd been watching me closely since my collapse, checking on me constantly, making sure I wasn't pushing myself too hard. You blocked them, she said. It wasn't a question. She could see it on my face. I nodded, and she smiled, fierce and proud. Good. Now let's talk about something important. She pulled out her phone and showed me a business plan she'd been working on. It was rough, mostly notes and ideas, but the concept was clear, a small logistics and warehousing company built on the principle of actually caring about workers. Fair wages, reasonable hours, health insurance that wasn't garbage, mental health support, and a culture that treated employees like human beings instead of expendable resources. "You nearly died for this warehouse," Ava said, gesturing around the break room with its flickering lights and broken vending machine. "You've given them 3 years of double shifts and loyalty. What have they given you besides minimum wage and a cardiac episode?" She wasn't wrong. The warehouse had no sympathy for my collapse. They'd marked it as an unexcused absence until my doctor's note arrived. "Let's build something better," Ava continued. "Something that values people. We have the experience. We know what workers actually need. Let's build it ourselves." We launched the company quietly, working out of Ava's apartment in the evenings after our warehouse shifts. I poured all my pain and anger into spreadsheets, customer service plans, safety protocols, and worker benefits packages. Every system we designed was a rejection of how we'd been treated. Every policy we wrote was a promise to do better. Ava handled networking and sales, using her natural charisma to connect with small businesses that needed warehousing and logistics support. I handled operations, using my 3 years of warehouse experience to perfect processes and eliminate inefficiencies. We called it Quinn Associates. Ava insisted on using my name, saying I deserved to have something that was truly mine. Within 2 months, we had our first contract with a local bookstore that needed inventory management. It was small, barely enough to cover our startup costs, but it was real. Within 4 months, we had 3 contracts. I was working 2 jobs, exhausted constantly, surviving on coffee and determination. But for the first time in my life, I was building something that mattered. Something that couldn't be taken away or undervalued. Something mine. My father called on a Tuesday evening. I'd been avoiding their calls for weeks, letting them go to voicemail, not responding to texts. But something made me answer this time. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need to hear what excuse they'd finally offer. "Mara," my father said, his voice warm and familiar in a way that used to comfort me. "We haven't heard from you in a while. Your mother's worried." I almost laughed. Worried now, after weeks of silence. Not worried when I was dying. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat. There was a pause, then he cleared his throat. "Well, actually, I was calling about Lacey. She's trying to start a design company, finally putting her art school experience to use. She's looking for investors, and your mother and I thought, since you've always been so good with money, maybe you could help her get started." Investment. They wanted money. That's what this call was really about. Not my health, not reconciliation, not even a basic apology. Just money. "Family helps family, Mara," my father continued when I didn't respond. "You know that." Those words, "family helps family," hit me like ice water. I took a breath, steadying myself. I said calmly, carefully, "Family didn't even show up when I was dying, Dad. Family didn't come to the hospital. Family didn't call to check if I survived. But now family needs money, so suddenly I exist again." The silence on the other end was complete. Then my father's voice came back, defensive and sharp. "That's not fair, Mara. We explained about that. We thought you were exaggerating. How were we supposed to know it was serious?" "The hospital told you I was in the ICU," I said. "They told you I'd gone into cardiac arrest. What part of that sounded like exaggeration?" "You need to stop being so dramatic about this," he snapped. "We're your parents. We know you. You've always blown things out of proportion." That was it. That was the line I couldn't cross back over. "Tell Lacey she's on her own," I said. "Tell her to use the $15,000 I paid off for her student loans. Tell her to use the thousands more I sent over the years. Tell her to build her company with the money I already gave her." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt something like relief. Like I'd finally said the truth that had been building inside me for years. 2 days later, Lacey posted on Instagram again. This time it was one of those inspirational quote graphics shared by people who thought motivation could replace actual work. "When others doubt you, prove them wrong. Nail polish #bossbabe #entrepreneur #nevergiveyoop." I stared at that post and realized something that made my stomach turn. She was using my money. The savings I'd sent her years ago, the rent payments and grocery money and emergency loans that had never been repaid. She was using all of it to fund this new business venture while posting about proving doubters wrong. I wasn't a doubter. I was the bank she'd been robbing for years while acting like she was self-made. The comments under her post were full of support and encouragement. "You got this, Queen. So proud of you. Can't wait to see your success." No one knew that her startup capital was built on my sacrifice. No one knew she was succeeding on my back while I recovered from nearly dying. I took another screenshot and added it to the folder I'd been building. Evidence. Documentation. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I was keeping track of everything. Quinn Associates was growing faster than we'd expected. Our 3 contracts turned into 7, then 12. Small businesses loved our model: fair pricing, reliable service, and actually treating their products and data with care. We hired our first 2 employees, both former warehouse workers who'd been burned out by the same corporate indifference that had nearly killed me. Ava and I worked constantly, barely sleeping, but we were building something real. 6 months after my collapse, I quit my warehouse job. The look on my manager's face when I gave notice, surprised that I'd dare to leave, was almost worth the years of mistreatment. Within 8 months of launching, we'd secured a partnership with a major regional distributor who'd been impressed by our worker-first model and our efficiency rates. Suddenly, Quinn Associates was handling significant volume, and I was making 6 figures for the first time in my life. Ava and I celebrated with cheap takeout in our new office space, a small converted storefront, nothing fancy, but ours. She raised her soda cup in a toast, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Mara. We did it." I raised my cup to meet hers, and for the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. My success didn't happen in a vacuum. Word spread through my extended family that I'd started a company, that it was doing well, that I was making real money now. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out. Cousins wanted to reconnect. Aunts sent friend requests. Everyone seemed very interested in how I was doing, though no one mentioned my collapse or acknowledged that they'd never checked on me when I was sick. I ignored most of them, but I watched my parents and Lacey's social media from a distance, using a friend's account to see what they were posting. Lacey's design company had launched with a flashy website and bold promises. She was posting constantly about client meetings and creative projects, though I noticed she never actually showed any finished work. My parents shared her posts religiously, commenting things like "so proud of our girl" and "talented beyond measure." There was never any mention of me. No acknowledgement that their other daughter had built a successful business from nothing. I told myself I didn't care about their validation anymore. Mostly, I believed it. But sometimes, late at night, I still felt that old ache, the child in me who'd wanted to be seen, to matter, to be enough. One night, about 9 months after my collapse, my phone rang with a call from my father. I almost didn't answer, but something in the timing, late, urgent, made me pick up. His voice was shaky when he spoke, and for the first time in my memory, my father sounded scared. "Mara," he said, "I need to talk to you about something important. It's about the family." I waited, silent. He continued, "Lacey's business, it didn't work out. She took on some debt, made some bad investments. She's broke, Mara. Really broke. And your mother and I co-signed some loans for her. We might lose the house." The house. The house I'd helped pay the mortgage on for 3 years. The house they'd risked to fund Lacey's fantasy. "I don't understand what this has to do with me," I said carefully. "We need your help," my father said bluntly. "We know you're doing well now. Your company is successful. You could loan us enough to get stable, just until Lacey gets back on her feet." Back on her feet, using my money again. The cycle continuing forever. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up before he could push harder. But I had no intention of helping. I was done being their safety net. A week later, they showed up at my office unannounced. I was in a meeting with Ava and a potential client when my assistant knocked on the door, her face apologetic. "Your family is here," she said quietly. "They say it's urgent." I excused myself and found all 3 of them in our small lobby, my parents looking older and stressed, Lacey looking thinner and desperate. The successful, carefree Instagram version of Lacey was gone. This version had dark circles under her eyes and clothes that didn't quite fit right anymore. "We need to talk," my mother said, her voice cracking. "Please, Mara. We're family." Family. That word again. Deployed like a weapon when they needed something but forgotten when I'd needed them. "You're here during business hours," I said coolly. "You'll have to schedule a meeting if you want to discuss business." Lacey scoffed, some of her old attitude returning. "Business. We're family, Mara. We don't need an appointment to see you." But Ava had appeared beside me, her presence solid and protective. Actually, she said firmly, you do. This is a place of business. If you'd like to schedule a meeting with Ms. Quinn, you can speak with our assistant. My parents looked shocked. Lacey looked furious. But they left, and I breathed easier once they were gone. They scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday. I prepared for it the way I'd prepare for any difficult client negotiation, with documentation, clear boundaries, and Ava sitting beside me for support. When they arrived, I led them to our conference room and offered water. Professional, distant, nothing like the eager-to-please daughter I'd once been. My father cleared his throat and began his pitch. They needed money, $60,000 to cover Lacey's debts and their mortgage arrears. They'd pay me back, of course, with interest. It was an investment in family. Think of your future niece or nephew, my mother added, her voice pleading. Lacey wants children someday. We're drowning, Mara. You're the only one who can save us. I let them finish, watching their desperation mount. Then I asked a question I'd been holding on to for 9 months. Did you think of me when I was dying on that hospital floor? The conference room went silent. My mother's face crumpled. My father looked away. Lacey stared at her hands. Did you think of me when I was alone in the ICU? I continued, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. Did you think of me when you went to brunch, when you posted about family first, when you called me dramatic for nearly dying? They had no answer. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and damning. Finally, my mother whispered, we made a mistake, Mara. We admit that. But we're here now. We're asking for help. Isn't that what matters? What matters, I said slowly, is that you only came when you needed money. Not to apologize. Not to repair our relationship. Just to use me one more time. I slid an envelope across the conference table. Inside were printouts of Quinn Associates charitable initiatives, our Worker Assistance Fund, our scholarship program for children of warehouse employees, our partnerships with organizations supporting working families in crisis. This is who I help now, I said. People who actually need it. People who would have shown up if they'd gotten a call that I was dying. People who understand that family means more than biology and financial convenience. Lacey was crying now, her face blotchy and red. I'm sorry, Mara, she choked out. I'm so sorry. I thought you were just, always fine. You were always so strong, always handling everything. I didn't realize you could break. I did break, I said quietly. I broke when my heart stopped. I broke when no one came. I broke when I realized I'd spent years sacrificing for people who didn't value me. But I rebuilt myself into something better. My father tried one more approach, leaning forward with the reasonable tone he'd always used to manipulate me. We understand you're hurt. But think practically, Mara. We're still your parents. We raised you. We gave you everything when you were growing up. Don't you owe us something? The audacity of that question, suggesting I owed them after they'd abandoned me, actually made me laugh. I paid you back already, I said. Every dollar I sent over the past 3 years. Every mortgage payment, every car repair, every emergency loan. That was my repayment for childhood. We're even now. I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. I'm not giving you money. I'm not co-signing loans. I'm not saving Lacey's failed business or your house. You're adults who made choices. Live with the consequences. Ava stood with me, her presence reinforcing my words. My mother started crying in earnest. My father's face went red with anger. But it was Lacey who spoke, her voice small and broken. I really am sorry, March. For everything. For not coming to the hospital. For taking your money all those years. For not seeing you. I was selfish and stupid, and I'm sorry. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from any of them. It didn't change anything, but I acknowledged it. Thank you, I said. Then I left them in the conference room and went back to work. They didn't contact me again after that meeting. I heard through extended family that they'd sold the house and moved into a smaller apartment. That Lacey was working at a grocery store, the same kind of job I'd worked to pay off her student loans. That my parents were both working again, struggling but surviving. I felt something complicated about that news, not quite satisfaction, but not guilt either. Just a sense that justice had been served. Meanwhile, Quinn Associates continued growing. We expanded to 2 additional cities, hired 20 more employees, and were profiled in several business magazines. The articles focused on our worker-first model, our efficiency rates, and the success story of a warehouse worker who'd nearly died and then built a company that actually valued human life. I kept one headline framed in my office: "Warehouse worker builds a company that cares." It reminded me every day why we'd started this, what mattered, what was worth fighting for. Ava was promoted to COO. We hired a CFO and a head of HR. The scrappy startup became a real company with structure and sustainability. And through it all, I kept the voicemails from my parents saved on my phone. Not to hurt myself with them, but to remember who I'd been and who I'd become. One Sunday morning, about a year and a half after my collapse, I was having brunch with Ava and some of our employees at a cafe downtown. It was a team-building thing, casual and friendly, exactly the kind of workplace culture we'd wanted to create. Someone took a photo of the group of us laughing over pancakes and coffee. Ava posted it on our company Instagram with the caption, "Sunday brunch with the Quinn Associates family red heart # these people are the reason we do what we do." I stared at that caption for a long moment. Family. She'd called our team family. And looking around the table at people who'd shown up for each other, who'd supported each other through crises and celebrated each other's successes, I realized she was right. This was family. Not the people who shared my DNA and abandoned me. Not the sister who'd gone to brunch while I was dying. But the people who'd chosen to be there, who'd built something together, who'd created a community based on actual care instead of obligatory biology. I commented on Ava's post, "My real family red heart #, and for the first time since my collapse, I meant it. Family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up. It was about choosing each other, again and again, especially when things were hard. My biological family had failed that test. But I'd found a new one that passed it every single day. Months passed. The company stabilized at a healthy size, profitable but not greedy, growing but not at the expense of our values. I'd moved into a nice apartment, saved money for the first time in my life, and started therapy to process everything that had happened. My therapist helped me understand that grieving a family that had never really existed was okay, that anger was a valid response to abandonment, and that building boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I dated casually, made friends outside of work, took up painting as a hobby. I built a life that was mine, filled with people who valued me. Sometimes I thought about reaching out to my family, testing whether enough time had passed for real reconciliation. But then I'd remember that they'd never apologized without wanting something. They'd never acknowledged the harm they'd caused without immediately asking for forgiveness and help. Real change required accountability, and they'd shown no sign of that. So I focused on what I could control, being a good boss, a loyal friend, a person who showed up when people needed her. I made sure every employee at Quinn Associates knew their value. I created the kind of workplace I'd needed when I was dying on that warehouse floor. And slowly, painfully, I healed. 2 years after my collapse, I was invited to speak at a business conference about building ethical companies in logistics industries. It was a big venue, hundreds of people in attendance, and I was terrified. But Ava convinced me to do it. "Your story matters," she'd said. "People need to hear that you can survive abandonment and build something beautiful from the wreckage." I told my story on that stage, the collapse, the hospital, the abandonment, the decision to build something better. I talked about the voicemails I'd saved, the Instagram posts that had shown me the truth, the moment I'd realized I deserved more. I talked about Quinn Associates and our mission to value workers as humans. The applause was overwhelming. Afterward, dozens of people approached me, some sharing their own stories of family betrayal, others asking advice about starting ethical businesses, many just wanting to say thank you for being honest about pain and survival. One woman, probably in her 50s, squeezed my hand and said, "I needed to hear that it's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they are family. Thank you." That night, my speech was shared across social media. Thousands of comments poured in, and the article about Quinn Associates was shared over 100,000 times. My phone exploded with notifications. Somewhere in that flood of messages, I saw that Lacey had watched the video. She'd sent me a friend request, the first communication in 2 years. I looked at that request for a long time. Then I declined it. Maybe someday we'd reconcile. Maybe someday she'd do the work required to rebuild trust. But that day wasn't today. Today, I was protecting my peace. The following Sunday, I found myself at brunch again with Ava and our team. It had become a tradition, a real one, not a performance for social media. Just people who cared about each other spending time together, celebrating another week of building something meaningful. Ava took a photo of me laughing at something our HR director had said, genuinely happy, surrounded by people I trusted. She posted it with a simple caption. With my family red heart hash, I looked at that photo and saw a version of myself I'd never expected to become. Stronger, yes, but not because I'd had to be. Strong because I'd chosen to be. Because I'd walked away from people who'd diminished me and found people who celebrated me. My business was thriving. My chosen family was real. My life was mine. And I smiled, genuinely and completely, because for the first time in my 29 years, it was actually true. I had a family. I had a home. I had a life worth living. Not because of the people I was born to, but because of the people I'd chosen and who'd chosen me back. That was the real happy ending, not revenge or reconciliation, but the simple truth that I'd survived, built something beautiful, and found people who showed up. People who would never let me die alone on a warehouse floor. People who understood that family was a verb, not a noun. People who loved me not despite my struggles, but through them. And that was enough. That was everything.